Picture this. Deep beneath the mountains of Iran, carved into rock over decades and at a cost of billions of dollars, sits a network of underground cities. Not cities for civilians, cities for missiles, tunnels wide enough to drive military vehicles through. Underground halls lined with hundreds of ballistic missiles, each one capable of reaching targets across the Middle East. The regime poured its pride, its resources, and its entire war strategy into these fortresses, genuinely believing they were untouchable. They were wrong. The bunkers are caving in on themselves. And to make it happen, the United States deployed weapons so precisely lethal that they turned the greatest military asset of the regime into its greatest liability. Let us start with the numbers because they tell a story more devastating than any headline. Over 3,000 strikes conducted across the country, 43 warships destroyed, an 83% decrease in drone attacks after launch sites were crippled all across the territory, and daily missile launches have collapsed by more than 90% from their peak in the opening days of the conflict. These are not estimates. These are the figures coming directly from military officials, satellite imagery analysts, and intelligence assessments published in real time. But before we get to the mechanics of how all of this happened, we need to understand the weapon at the center of this story, because this weapon explains everything. The United States Air Force's massive ordnance penetrator. It is 20 feet long. It weighs 30,000 pounds. It carries 11 tons of explosive power, and it is capable of tunneling through more than 100 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. This weapon had never been used in an operational conflict before. It had only ever been tested, until now. 7 stealth bombers flew east from their base in the American Midwest on a mission that would become the longest flight for that airframe in over 2 decades. Those bombers refueled multiple times in midair over an 18-hour journey toward the target. Meanwhile, a separate group of identical bombers flew west toward the Pacific as decoys, deliberately seeding confusion into any intelligence network watching American aircraft movements. More than 125 aircraft participated in the total operation, including fighter escorts, surveillance drones, and aerial refueling tankers. The Pentagon dubbed the nuclear strike phase of this campaign a name that echoed with finality. And when the Secretary of Defense stood at the podium to describe it, he did not hold back. In a press briefing, he declared that the nuclear ambitions had been obliterated. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, speaking alongside the Secretary, called it the largest operational strike of its kind in United States history, producing extremely severe damage and destruction to the targets. Here is where it gets deeply technical and deeply important. Those 7 bombers dropped 14 of these massive penetrators on 2 targets: a uranium enrichment plant buried deep inside a mountain and a major nuclear facility. The mountain site is buried under 300 feet of solid rock. That depth was deliberate. It was chosen specifically because conventional weapons cannot reach it. But as the chairman explained at the briefing, American engineers at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency had been studying this site for approximately 15 years. They monitored the vent shaft, the exhaust shaft, the electrical systems, the environmental control systems, every nook, every crater, every piece of equipment going in, and every piece of equipment going out. 2 of those officers had literally dreamed about this target as they slept. This was not improvised. This was 15 years of patient, obsessive preparation, culminating in a strike that no one saw coming. The delivery method itself was a marvel of precision. According to the briefing, the lead bomber dropped 2 munitions on the first aim point. The first bomb forcibly removed a defensive concrete cap, uncovering the main shaft underneath. Weapons 2, 3, 4, and 5 then entered that exposed shaft, traveling at more than 1,000 feet per second into the complex below, before detonating in what was described as the mission space. 12 of these giant bombs went into the mountain facility, 2 went into the secondary site, and from a submarine operating in the region, more than 24 cruise missiles were fired at surface infrastructure targets at another major complex. According to satellite imagery, several large-diameter holes and craters appeared along the ridge above the underground complex. A layer of gray-blue ash spread across a wide area. Multiple tunnel entrances were blocked with dirt following the airstrikes. Open-source analysts created topographical models layering imagery from the day of the strike. And what they found suggests that the strike hit the Cascade Hall buried underneath the impact points. This was not a near miss. This was surgical destruction at a depth the world had never seen in combat. Now, the nuclear strikes were just one chapter of a much larger campaign, because before the bombers ever took off, the air defense network had already been destroyed. And that collapse is what made everything else possible. Strikes beginning in the days prior spent approximately 10 days systematically dismantling the nation's air defenses. After the previous 12-day war a year earlier, the Allied forces had already claimed that they destroyed 120 transporter erector launchers and established full aerial superiority within days. But that previous war left work unfinished. The regime rebuilt. And when the current conflict began, the Allied forces returned with one mission: finish the job. An assessment of the ongoing operation found that approximately 85% of air defense components had been destroyed across the entire country, including systems of all types, radars, and detection means. For comparison, during the previous conflict, air superiority had only been achieved in 3 specific regions. Now it covers the entire country. The capital itself became vulnerable. Their fighters did not fly. As confirmed at the briefing, it appears that the surface-to-air missile systems did not see the incoming strike package at all. The country that spent decades and tens of billions of dollars building an integrated air defense network was rendered blind at the moment that mattered most. But now we need to step back further, because the air defense collapse and the nuclear strikes are only part of this story. The bigger story is what happened to the missile cities. And to understand that, you first need to understand what a missile city actually is. The concept of the missile city is unlike anything in the Western military playbook. In the year prior to this conflict, the regime actually released video tours of at least 4 of these facilities, displaying them as a show of strength. These videos showed medium-range ballistic missiles, with ranges hovering around the 1,000-mile mark. They showed land attack cruise missiles. They showed the vast underground tunnel networks used to transport and store massive stockpiles. These were not simple underground bunkers. These were entire subterranean military ecosystems, complete with roads, command facilities, logistics infrastructure, and launch systems, all integrated into mountains and deep terrain. Decades of work had gone into the construction of these bunkers. The leadership genuinely believed these facilities were the insurance policy that guaranteed the regime's survival. If they were ever threatened with obliteration, the missile cities would allow them to launch thousands of ballistic missiles and saturation strikes that would overwhelm any adversary's defenses. It was their great equalizer. And here is the fatal flaw. Here is the error so simple, so structurally obvious in retrospect, that it is almost painful to articulate. The missile cities stripped all mobility from the missile strategy. A research associate at a non-proliferation studies center put it directly: what was once mobile and difficult to find is no longer mobile and easier to hit. That is the whole story. In an attempt to centralize and protect its missiles at massive scale, they created fixed targets. And fixed targets, once discovered, are simply targets. You do not need to chase them. You do not need to anticipate their movements. You simply wait for the right moment, and then you strike. Intelligence agencies had already identified where these so-called secret bunkers were located long before the first bomb fell. Satellite imagery can capture the transportation of missiles and personnel to and from these sites. Roads do not build themselves in the middle of nowhere without attracting attention. Thermal signatures, construction timelines, vehicle traffic patterns, all of it visible to the surveillance apparatus that the United States and its allies had quietly positioned above the region for years. So when the strikes began, the United States executed a wave-based strike strategy. These attacks are being carried out in waves where they destroy 2 or 3 targets at a time. After multiple waves, the bases lose their effectiveness due to the loss of surface structures and launchers. Wave after wave, each one collapsing more tunnels, destroying more missile launch sites, burying more of the arsenal underground where it could never be used. The penetrator bomb, which weighs approximately 2,000 pounds and is built with a steel alloy casing specifically engineered for hardened targets, has been the workhorse of this campaign. Once inside its target, the bomb unleashes a high-explosive blast fragmentation warhead that creates massive craters, allows for follow-up strikes, and can be delivered via guided bomb kits at distances of up to 15 miles, keeping American aircraft beyond the reach of whatever remained of the air defenses. We have seen what this weapon can do before. A 2,000-pound penetrator was the weapon used to kill a major paramilitary leader, along with several of his senior commanders, targeting an underground bunker where they were coordinating their military operations. The bomb penetrated so cleanly and exploded so deep that nearby civilians survived the surface blast. That is the precision and penetrative power the United States has now brought to the missile cities at a scale never before imagined. An underground bunker has one critical weakness. You can only use it if you can get in and out of it. And the United States found the exits. Satellite imagery tells the story better than any briefing. Before and after photographs of several sites showed an entire surface facility razed to the ground. In one location, the entrance to an underground complex had been caved in. In another, above-ground buildings had been leveled with a telltale crater sitting directly beside a tunnel entrance. Another 2,000-pound penetrator had found its mark, collapsed the passage, and sealed whatever was inside forever. The missile cities were never designed to function as sealed tombs. They were designed as active military platforms where missiles could be moved in, loaded onto launchers, transported to firing positions, used, and replenished. That entire cycle depended on the freedom to move in and out. When the United States began systematically destroying the entrances and exits of these complexes, the missiles became entombed. The launches that had to be staged near the surface to enable ballistic missile fire became sitting ducks for American warplanes and surveillance aircraft circling continuously above. Warplanes and armed drones circled over dozens of cavernous bases, striking missile-carrying launchers the moment they emerged to fire. Meanwhile, waves of heavy bombers dropped munitions directly on the sites, apparently entombing weapons below ground in numerous locations. And now the data from the battlefield tells us exactly how complete this dismantlement has been. According to the head of United States Central Command, the ability of the regime to strike American assets and partners is declining. That statement was released early in the conflict. The following morning, the chairman confirmed that theater ballistic missile launches had fallen 86% since the first day of the conflict, with the sharpest drop in the preceding 24 hours. According to analysis by Defense Research Foundations, the conflict opened with approximately 480 missile launches in a single day. A desperate all-in-saturation strike designed to overwhelm Allied air defenses before the campaign could gain momentum. By just over a week later, that daily launch rate had collapsed to approximately 40 missiles. That is a decline of 92% in just 10 days. The drone numbers tell the same story. From a peak of 720 drone launches per day at the start of the conflict, the rate fell to approximately 60 per day within the same time frame. The combined operations drove daily missile fire down approximately 3 times faster than the suppression campaign during the previous year's 12-day war. And the comparison to the 12-day war is instructive. In the previous conflict, according to data from strategic studies centers, approximately 627 ballistic missiles and 735 drones were fired across the entire 12-day conflict. In the current war, those totals were exceeded within the first 4 days. But crucially, the rate of collapse in the current campaign is steeper and faster. The adversary entered this fight harder, but fell apart sooner. The underlying capacity is not being conserved. It is being physically destroyed. The losses compound in other ways too. Within the first 24 hours of the joint strikes, approximately half of the missile launchers had been taken out of commission. The assessment by day 10 estimated that between only 100 and 200 active launchers remained. Before this war, The launcher fleet had been substantially rebuilt after the 12-Day War, with the leadership pursuing an accelerated rehabilitation program targeting an arsenal of 8,000 missiles within the next few years. That ambition is gone. The infrastructure to execute it is largely gone too. Analysis of the previous war identified a key dynamic that has now been amplified massively in this campaign. Without functional air defenses to cover transporter erector launchers and support vehicles as they emerged from underground missile bases, Allied aircraft could strike the mobile launchers and tunnel entrances at will, bottling up whatever remained inside. This is precisely the dynamic that has been playing out on a far larger scale in the current conflict. And there is one more layer to all of this that makes the situation even more desperate. The United States is not just destroying what currently exists, it is pursuing the capacity to rebuild. In a press update, the regional commander proclaimed that 2 bombers had dropped dozens of 2,000-pound penetrator bombs targeting deeply buried ballistic missile launchers. He added that the United States is following direct orders to raise the entire missile capability to the ground. And then his words became even more sweeping. The president gave us another task, he said, to raise or level the ballistic missile industrial base. So, they are not just hitting what they have, they are destroying the ability to rebuild. This is the systematic destruction of an entire military doctrine. It is not just the missiles, it is not just the bunkers, it is the factories that manufacture them, the supply chains that feed them, the engineering capacity that would allow them to start over. Assessments from week 3 of the conflict confirmed that strikes have caused highly significant damage to launching, storage, and production capabilities simultaneously. The ability to project ballistic missile power is not being degraded, it is being erased. There is something almost paradoxical in how this was brought upon the regime itself. The missile cities represented decades of investment, strategic brilliance, and genuine engineering achievement. They were built to provide survivability in exactly the kind of conflict they now find themselves in. And yet, by concentrating the entire missile doctrine into fixed underground sites, the regime made itself permanently vulnerable to any adversary with the intelligence infrastructure to find those sites and the munitions to penetrate them. The United States had both, and it had been quietly preparing to use them for years, studying every vent shaft, every exhaust system, every construction detail of the most important facilities with a level of obsession that the regime clearly underestimated. Satellite imagery, surveillance aircraft, intelligence networks, patient years-long preparation, and then when the moment came, 14 30,000-pound bombs dropped in a single night on the most hardened nuclear facilities in existence. That is what it looks like when preparation meets opportunity. The crude silos dug into mountainsides pointing toward the Persian Gulf offered almost no additional survivability. They are essentially fixed points, easily located, easily targeted. The mobile launcher approach offered more flexibility in theory. But once surveillance aircraft control the skies continuously, a mobile launcher that moves is a mobile launcher that gets spotted and struck. According to the commander-in-chief, the United States requires just 4 minutes from detecting a missile launch to dispatching a bomber to destroy the launch site. 4 minutes. That does not leave enough time to fire, move, and survive. The broader consequences of all this are still unfolding. The elite military guard corps has reportedly begun shifting toward asymmetric ground operations as conventional military power collapses, with outside powers providing real-time intelligence on American positions. Reports suggest that the succession of leadership with the armed forces pledging allegiance indicates that the regime is attempting institutional continuity. But as assessments from research centers note, it is impossible to know whether the conditions for the regime's fall have already been created. What is known is that the air defense network is essentially gone. The missile production infrastructure has been struck hard. The stockpile of ballistic missiles is being consumed at a rate that is unsustainable. The launcher fleet has been reduced to a fraction of its wartime strength. And the underground missile cities, the crown jewels of decades of strategic thinking, have been turned into traps. The nuclear program that was the center of all the tension is in ruins. A nuclear weapons expert analyzing data from the International Atomic Energy Agency concluded after the strikes that there is no path to produce weapons-grade uranium at any of the known centrifuge plants for the first time in 15 years. 15 years of nuclear ambition undone in a single night by 7 bombers that the regime never saw coming. For outside observers watching from distant capitals, this is a nightmare scenario. The state in question was the linchpin of an alternative power axis that had been constructed over years. A resistant, missile-armed, nuclear-adjacent power that could pin down American resources in the Middle East, while other objectives were pursued in Europe. That calculation is now being shredded alongside the missile silos and bunker entrances. The regime is collapsing alongside its missile threat, and taking with it all of those carefully built plans for the region. The lesson of all this is not simply that the United States has powerful weapons. Everyone knew that. The lesson is that preparation, patience, and intelligence are what make powerful weapons decisive. 15 years of studying a mountain facility, 15 years of mapping exhaust shafts and centrifuge halls, watching and waiting. And when the moment arrived, striking with such precision and such scale that no amount of concrete or mountain rock made any difference. The regime thought it was being clever when it built its missile cities. It was not. It was building a map of its own destruction and handing that map to the one adversary with the patience to read it carefully and the firepower to act on it completely. We will, of course, keep you updated as new assessments emerge, as satellite imagery continues to reveal the full scope of damage, and as the broader consequences of this military collapse play out across the region and beyond. Thank you for watching.